On the afternoon of July 4th, 1946, thousands of people gathered on a grassy hill overlooking the Polish city of Gdańsk. The crowd stretched across the field in uneasy silence as soldiers guarded the area. At the center of the hill stood several wooden gallows, their ropes swaying slowly in the warm summer air. Many in the crowd had lived through the devastation of World War II. Some had lost family members during the occupation. Others had survived the concentration camps themselves. They had come here for one reason: to witness justice. This was not an execution hidden behind prison walls. It was meant to be seen. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of engines. A convoy of trucks began climbing the road toward the hill. Standing in the back of those trucks were prisoners whose hands were tied behind their backs and whose legs were bound with cords. None of them wore blindfolds. They could see the thousands of faces staring back at them. Among them stood a young woman. She looked small compared to the guards surrounding her. She was only 22 years old. Her name was Elisabeth Becker. In only a few minutes, she would stand beneath one of those ropes. But the story of how an ordinary young woman ended up on that hill, waiting to be executed in front of thousands, began years earlier. Elisabeth Becker was born in July of 1923 in the region then known as the Free City of Danzig, a territory created after the First World War and placed under international administration. Today, that city is known as Gdańsk in Poland, but during Becker's childhood, it was a German-speaking city caught between competing political pressures. Life there during the 1920s and early 1930s was shaped by economic hardship and political instability. Germany and its surrounding regions were still struggling to recover from the devastation left by the First World War. Inflation had wiped out savings for many families, unemployment was widespread, and political tensions often erupted in the streets. Like many children growing up in that environment, Becker lived an ordinary life within a working-class family whose daily concerns were survival and stability. During Becker's childhood, Germany was undergoing dramatic political change. In 1933, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power, and within a few years, the regime began reshaping nearly every aspect of German society. Schools were reorganized to emphasize loyalty to the state and obedience to authority. Youth organizations became powerful tools for spreading Nazi ideology among the younger generation. Propaganda filled newspapers, classrooms, films, and radio broadcasts, constantly reinforcing the message that the nation was being reborn under the leadership of the regime. For young people growing up during this period, these influences were everywhere. Like millions of other German teenagers, Becker eventually joined the League of German Girls, known as the Bund Deutscher Mädel. In this organization was the female branch of the Hitler Youth Movement and was designed to train young women in the values promoted by the Nazi government. Members attended meetings, participated in group activities, and were taught lessons about loyalty, discipline, and the ideology of the regime. They sang songs praising the state, attended gatherings filled with patriotic symbolism, and were encouraged to see themselves as part of a new generation that would build the future of Germany. For many teenagers living during that time, joining these organizations felt normal. It was simply part of growing up in Nazi Germany. During her late teenage years, Becker's life appeared ordinary. Records suggest that she worked as a cook for a period of time and later took jobs connected to agricultural labor. She prepared meals in kitchens, one helped with farm work, and lived the life of a young working woman. From the outside, there was nothing remarkable about her circumstances. She was not a soldier, nor a political leader, nor someone involved in major decisions about the war. Yet the war that began in 1939 would eventually draw her into one of the most infamous systems created by the Nazi regime. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the world entered a conflict that would become the largest and most destructive war in human history. The invasion quickly brought the city of Danzig under German control, and the region became part of Nazi Germany. As the war expanded across Europe, millions of civilians found themselves contributing to the massive war effort. Men were drafted into the armed forces and sent to fight on distant battlefields. Factories increased production of weapons, vehicles, and ammunition. Women took on new roles in offices, factories, and farms to support the wartime economy. At the same time, another system was expanding behind the front lines: the concentration camp network. The Nazi regime created a vast system of camps designed to imprison political opponents, resistance fighters, and many others considered enemies of the state. One of those camps was the Stutthof concentration camp, located east of Gdańsk near the Baltic coast. Established shortly after Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Stutthof began as a detention center for Polish civilians and resistance members. Over time, it grew into a large camp complex surrounded by barbed wire fences and guarded watchtowers. Thousands of prisoners passed through the camp's gates during the war. They included political prisoners, members of resistance movements, civilians accused of opposing Nazi rule, and many others caught in the machinery of occupation. Conditions inside the camp were harsh and often deadly. Prisoners lived in overcrowded barracks where food was scarce and disease spread quickly. Many were forced into exhausting labor that supported the German war economy. For countless prisoners, survival depended on endurance, luck, and the hope that the war would one day end. In 1944, Elisabeth Becker was assigned to work at Stutthof as a female guard. She was 21 years old at the time. Her duties included supervising prisoners, maintaining order within the women's section of the camp, and assisting with roll calls that took place each day. Guards held enormous power within the camp system. They controlled the movements of prisoners and enforced discipline through punishments and threats. After the war ended, survivors who had been imprisoned at Stutthof began describing their experiences to investigators. Some of those witnesses accused Becker of participating in mistreatment and punishments inside the camp. Others claimed that she took part in identifying prisoners who were considered too weak to continue working, selections that could determine whether a prisoner would survive or be sent to die. By late 1944, the war had begun turning decisively against Germany. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army was advancing rapidly westward, pushing German forces back toward their own borders. At the same time, Allied armies from the United States and Britain were advancing across Western Europe. German cities were being heavily bombed, factories were destroyed, and supply lines were collapsing. The once powerful German military was slowly retreating as defeat became increasingly inevitable. As Soviet forces approached the region surrounding Stutthof, camp authorities began evacuating prisoners. Thousands were forced onto long marches away from the advancing front lines. These marches were chaotic and dangerous, and many prisoners died along the way from exhaustion, hunger, or exposure to harsh weather. At the same time, guards and administrators attempted to escape before the front lines reached the camp. During this period of chaos, Elisabeth Becker fled the camp and attempted to return to civilian life. Like many others connected to the camp system, she tried to disappear among the millions of displaced people moving across war-torn Europe. For a short time, she managed to avoid detection, but after Germany surrendered in May 1945, investigators began searching for individuals connected to the concentration camps. Survivors were interviewed, documents were examined, and authorities attempted to identify guards and administrators who had served in the camps. Eventually, Becker was located and arrested by Polish authorities. She was taken into custody and transferred to Poland to stand trial alongside other individuals connected to Stutthof. The proceedings became part of what historians now refer to as the Stutthof trials. During the trial, survivors described the conditions they had endured inside the camp. Witnesses spoke about forced labor, starvation, punishments, and the constant fear that defined daily life behind the barbed wire fences. Some of those testimonies directly accused Becker of mistreating prisoners. After weeks of testimony and examination of evidence, the court reached its verdict. Becker was found guilty of crimes committed during her service in the camp and was sentenced to death by hanging. Nearly a year later, the sentence was ready to be carried out. On July 4, 1946, the condemned prisoners were transported to the hill outside Gdańsk where the gallows had been erected. The crowd watched as the prisoners were positioned beneath the ropes. Executioners moved along the line, placing nooses around each prisoner's neck. There were no blindfolds and no last-minute appeals. When the signal was given, the trucks moved forward and the ropes tightened. Within minutes, the executions were complete. Among those who died that evening was Elisabeth Becker, who was 22 years old. The execution became one of the most widely reported outcomes of the Stutthof trials. For many people living in the aftermath of the war, the trials represented an attempt to bring justice after years of suffering and destruction. At the same time, the events raised difficult questions about responsibility and accountability within the vast system created by Nazi Germany. Historians continue to study these trials today as part of the broader effort to understand how the concentration camp system operated and how individuals became part of it. The story of Elisabeth Becker remains one small but powerful chapter in that history.